의인이요 당대의 완전한 자로 칭함받은 노아, 그는 하나님과 동행한 사람이었습니다. 이번 미국 비전 트립에서는 켄터키주에 위치한 아크 인카운터를 방문했습니다. 이곳은 말씀에 기록된 노아의 방주 사건을 통해 성경의 무호성과 창조 질서를 다방면으로 증명하며 위대하신 하나님의 역사가 진리임을 전하고 있습니다. 포악한 세상의 조롱에도 하나님께서 명하신 대로 준행하여 방주를 만들고 그의 심판으로부터 구원받은 노아를 보며 오늘날 우리의 시대를, 우리의 교회를, 나 자신을 돌아봅니다. 노아의 때에도 2차 대각성 운동의 때에도 그리고 지금까지도 여러 세대의 자비를 나타내신 하나님께 감사를 드립니다. 오늘 그 은혜를 입은 자로서 주를 위해 살아가시겠습니까? 이 세대의 부흥을 위해 기꺼이 주님께 순복하시겠습니까?
So this is also to explain the critics. They say the Ark Encounter depicts a worst-case approach when estimating the number of animal kinds. So a lot of critics will say, well, how could Noah get that many animals onto the ark? So they think it's impossible. And some people believe from the Bible record, it says that Noah brought 2 of every unclean animal and 7 of every clean animal. But the text seems to indicate in the Bible that Noah cared for more animals than this, particularly when it comes to the clean animals and the flying creatures. No, the Lord may have sent 7 pairs of the clean animals and 7 pairs of all the flying creatures, not just the clean varieties. Although this approach more than doubles the estimated number of animals on the ark, our model shows that even a high-end estimate of total animals would have easily fit on board. Obviously, if the Lord had just sent 7 of each clean animal and 7 of the flying creatures, the ark would have had plenty of room, plenty of space to accommodate this lower total. So either way, no problem for getting this many animals on the ark. Would have sent Noah juveniles or smaller varieties within the same kind. And a kind, in Genesis 1, it talks about how there are different kinds of animals. And so, the idea of evolution is that one kind can come from another kind, but we never find that in the fossil record. This is something that evolutionists cannot explain. So within a kind, you can have adaptation, you can have variations, but you cannot have evolution from one kind to another kind. And so that's why it was only necessary for him to have a representation of that kind. He didn't need to have every variation within the kind, but just 2 representatives within that kind. And if there were smaller ones, no problem. And then over here, he's talking about the saltwater versus freshwater fish or sea creatures. And so here, obviously, any of the saltwater fish, fish that we find in the ocean, well, he didn't need to bring those on the ark because obviously, there's this ocean. In fact, the ocean didn't exist until the rain came. So they would say, well, what about the freshwater fish? What's he going to do with that? But then if you think about it, when the rain came, that water, if it were salty at all, which it may not have been, it all may have been fresh, and over time, the oceans became, because of the mineral deposits, and it became saltier. Think of like the Dead Sea. It becomes saltier and saltier over time because of the mineral buildup. So very likely the oceans were less salty, or maybe not really that salty. So it could have been all sea creatures were freshwater at first, and those that adapted to live in the ocean are now saltwater fish, and those that live in freshwater are freshwater fish. So they're explaining that it wasn't necessary for him to bring fish and sea creatures onto the ark because, of course, they can survive within the water, and the water wasn't as salty as it is now. here, this is explaining about how many different kinds of animals. Remember, think of a kind as a class of animal. And this is the language the Bible uses, that of every kind, God created different kinds of animals, mammals, reptiles, birds, fish, and so on. And so within those kinds, there can be variations, but within a kind itself, there's no crossing from one kind to another kind. So there were 1,398 animal kinds and on the ark, and a total of 6,744 animals. So those are the variations within those kinds. So 6,744. So that's a lot, but it's doable. A lot of people say, how in the world could Noah get all those animals? They think about all the animals that we see in the world today. Well, you think 6,700 animals, that's a lot, but in a boat this size, and the way that we see that he would have arranged it and provided for their food and getting rid of waste and everything, all that's been accounted for, and we see clearly it was very possible, very doable. So here they explain that everything fits. Current estimates from the Ark Encounter researchers place, like we said, 1,398 animal kinds on board the Ark, and each of these animal kinds and their basic needs, such as food, water, waste disposal, has been accounted for in the layout of the Ark. So we see everything fits, no problem. So they would have needed 322,000 total gallons of water needed, fresh water, for drinking, and also for the animals, so the animals can drink. And remember, they went on the Ark for like a year. It stopped raining after 40 days, but they didn't get off the Ark until after a year. So they need enough water on board so they're not going to run out of water. And so they've accounted for that. So Noah would have prepared for all of that as he was preparing the Ark and building it and getting all of these water storage vessels filled with fresh water and storing it and so on. They also would have been able to capture fresh water from the rain. So when you get fresh rainwater, they could go up on the roof after the rain had stopped and collect and catch rainwater as well. So there's no problem with fresh water. 285,000 gallons were in these cisterns. The cisterns we saw were those containers, those jars that would have contained water. They would have needed 400 tons of food. That's a lot of food. So this would have been different types of grains, seeds, nuts, preserved fruits and vegetables, and possibly live insects. So I don't know if you caught before when there's talk about the moths, because moths can really reproduce fast. So, you say, well, even if you bring, just 2 moths, they're going to multiply, and pretty soon you've got like hundreds and even thousands of moths. Well, those would have provided food for certain types of animals. And so we see then how everything fits, everything's accounted for, no problem for food. They would have been able to store enough food on board. And then 15,000 food storage vessels. Those were those long, tall types of containers, and they would have contained grains and so on, preserved fruits and vegetables, and this kind of thing. No need for storing sharks and sea creatures in the Ark, because they can survive in the ocean. And as far as freshwater fish, again, it's very likely the waters were not that salty, or maybe not salty at all. That takes time. So 85% of the animals weighed 22 pounds or less. This is another thing we think about, the weight. If you get on an airplane, and they always check the weight on your suitcase, because if you have too much weight, it's going to be dangerous. Well, on a boat too, you've got too much weight on a boat, it could sink the boat. And whenever a boat is in trouble, first thing to do is they're throwing stuff overboard to lighten the load. Well, this was a concern. People say, how could you have this many animals on board? Just the sheer weight alone would cause the Ark to sink. But when we think about 85% of the animals only weighed 22 pounds or less, so that's not that much. 7% weighed between 22 to 220 pounds. So you think an average human being, well, an average male might weigh anywhere from 150 pounds to 190, 200 pounds. So only 7% of the animals weighed upwards of 220 pounds. And then only 8% weighed over 220 pounds. So that means that the Ark was going to be able to sustain that much weight, no problem, based upon the size of the Ark, the number of animals. So they've really done their homework very well and calculated, and we see this is very possible, very doable. There would have been room enough for all of these animals, not just only space, but weight. And so God really instructed Noah how to do this, and so we see, yep, very doable.